so may life return your affections. To those who come to see the path, may a way be found, and the courage to take it step by step.
This morning's reading is a brief excerpt from Anne Lamott's book, Traveling Mercies. She writes, W.H. Auden was right when he wrote, I know nothing except what everyone knows. If there, when grace dances, I should dance. I know that Auden meant grace in the theological sense, meant it as the force that infuses our lives and keeps letting us off the hook. It is unearned love, the love that goes before, that greets us on the way. It's the help you receive when you have no bright ideas left, when you are empty and desperate and have discovered that your best thinking and your most charming charm have failed you. Grace is the light of electricity or juice or breeze that takes you from that isolated place and puts you with others who are as startled and embarrassed and eventually grateful as you are to be there. I do not understand at all the mystery of grace, only that it meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. The words of Anne Lamott. The title of my sermon today was taken from one of my favorite poems by Wendell Berry. When despair for the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound, in fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go down where the wood drake rests in his beauty on the water and the great heron feeds. I come into the peace of wild things who do not tax their lives with forethought of grief. I come into the presence of still water, and I feel above me the day-blind stars waiting for their light. For a time, I rest in the grace of the world and am free. As I say, this is one of my favorite poems, and it's because it speaks to my deep need to connect with the world through my experiences of nature. No doubt some of you have felt that experience as well, and maybe just now watching the leaves blow as Dick played that beautiful piece of music. And so I have many times in my life taken to the woods or the water, to the mountains or the fields to seek the solace that I find in the peace of wild things. But what about that phrase, the grace of the world? The grace of the world. What does it mean to rest in the grace of the world? What is this grace of which the poet speaks? Wendell Berry seems to imply that grace is simply part of the world, just like oxygen and sunlight. That the world is full of grace. But if that's the case, I wonder, why is it so hard to find sometimes? Why do we only experience moments of grace, if we experience them at all? I'm intrigued by how Wendell Berry juxtaposes despair for the world in the first line of the poem with the grace of the world in the last line. And here, I think, lies the key to this beautiful piece of poetry. The truth of this poem is that our world and our lives are at once terrible and beautiful, a source of both despair and of solace. We cannot have one without the other. Just this past Friday, I was sitting in a building in Newport, Rhode Island, bearing witness to the graduation of 91 newly minted ensigns in the United States Navy. My niece Vicki was one of them. The building where the graduation was held has hosted these graduations roughly every 12 weeks or so for decades, sending thousands of young men and women into the world to defend our nation and to fight in, unfortunately, too many wars. These are our best and our brightest young people who have dedicated themselves to a high cause, and I couldn't help but be moved as I watched them. And I couldn't help but think of how many men and women, just like those crossing the stage, have fought and died over the years. I prayed that day. I prayed perhaps harder than I ever have, that these young officers would never face battle, that they would never be forced to risk their lives, never face an enemy, never have to pay that ultimate sacrifice, despite their training and their calling. Looking into the freshly scrubbed faces of these young officers, I bore witness to the beauty of the world, their commitment, their achievement, their youth and their vigor, while at the same time I couldn't escape the acute sense of loss for all those who came before, and the fear that many of these fine young men and women might share the same fate. Rest in the world, despair for the world. Grace. Grace is the balm that soothes the woundedness of the world. It appears often unbidden when we least expect it and most need it. At the height of our anxiety or the depths of our depression, grace shows up. In some ways, grace is the antithesis of, or perhaps even the antidote to karma. According to some Hindu and Buddhist beliefs, our future is largely determined by our past, and karma dictates that as you sow, so shall you reap. If we are callous and hard-hearted, we'll pay for it in the future. But grace says otherwise. Grace isn't concerned with our state of mind or our past actions, for good or for ill. Even if we don't like it, grace is available to everyone. As you heard Anne Lamott tell us in our reading today, grace is the force that infuses our lives and keeps letting us off the hook. Keeps letting us off the hook. And as Chrissy told us in her reflection, grace can set things right, even when we've been wronged, or even when we've done wrong ourselves. So you've been hearing a lot about this word grace today, and I'm just wondering, how are you with this word, grace? Some of us from Christian backgrounds may feel a bit squirrely around the word and the concept. As you heard from Chrissy, in the Christian tradition, grace is a gift only God can bestow, and it is through God's grace alone, God's infinite power of love and forgiveness, that we are ultimately saved. Perhaps this is the meaning you ascribe to grace, and you're okay with that. And perhaps you've disposed of this notion when you may have left a Christian past. Let me be clear, far be it from me to deny the grace of God and its ability to grant us eternal salvation. I don't deny this possibility, and I respect your belief if it is so. But the grace that I'm speaking of today, dare I say it, is perhaps even more expansive than this Christian theological concept. It's more present in this life, in our lives, in the here and now, than that other kind of grace that speaks to the hereafter. It is, as Wendell Berry calls it, the grace of the world, or the grace in this world. The power that we have to confer it, and the ability that we have to receive it in the here and now. Grace, I think, is something more than simply making a moment of peace for ourselves in our busy lives, although that's important too. We can prepare the way for grace. We can extend the invitation for grace to show up, or even make a plea for it. We can go down where the wood drake lies and the great heron feeds, for sure. But we can't conjure up grace like it's some kind of magic trick. One of the key elements of grace is that it surprises us. It surprises us. We have no idea where it comes from or when it'll show up. And in fact, grace often appears when we least expect it and sometimes when we least deserve it as well. Here again, Anne Lamott. Grace is the help you receive when you have no bright ideas left, when you are empty and desperate and have discovered that your best thinking and your most charming charm have failed you. There's a story from the Zen Buddhist tradition that goes something like this. A monk is walking through a field of tall grass, and in the grasses he spies a tiger. And soon the tiger sees him, and the chase is on. The monk is running across the field to escape the tiger, and he comes to a cliff. The tiger is hot on his track, and the monk looks down, and he sees a vine hanging from the cliff. So he grabs the vine and he jumps off, and he's hanging there by the vine. And the tiger is at the top of the cliff looking down at him. The monk is somewhat relieved, and he thinks, well, maybe this vine is long enough and I can just go down the vine, climb down the vine, and escape the tiger. But when he looks down, he sees another tiger looking up at him, licking his lips. And so the monk decides, I'll just hang on to this vine for as long as I can, and maybe the two tigers will lose interest and go away, and I can either climb up or climb down. And then he looks closer at the vine where it meets the cliff, and he sees a small mouse. And the mouse begins to gnaw at the vine. And so just before the monk closes his eyes to pray, he spies something off to the side, something red. And he looks over at it, and it is a beautiful, fully ripe strawberry. And so he lets go of the vine with one hand, and he plucks the strawberry and puts it in his mouth and savors its sweet flavor. This story is often told to illustrate the true nature of our lives, but I tell it to you today because to me the appearance of that strawberry is grace. That is grace. In this most desperate of circumstances, beauty and goodness shows up for the monk, and it provides the monk with this unexpected relief. Now notice his predicament isn't transformed, but he is transformed. Even if only momentarily, he's removed from the situation and transported to some other plane where he can savor the sweetness of life. That, my friends, that is grace. The grace of the world, whether you believe in the existence of God or some other higher power, gives us a glimpse of what is possible. It might even be a glimpse into a reality that lies beneath or perhaps behind our everyday existence. Once more, Anne Lamott speaks to this when she says that grace meets us where we are, but does not leave us where it found us. Having received the gift of grace, we are changed. Grace reveals to us the realm of possibility. It shows us a way when it appears that there is no way. It's like the distant glow of a candle on the darkest of nights. I want to tell you one more story. I was about 45 years old. I was the father of 2 teenage girls, and I still hadn't figured out what I wanted to do with the rest of my life. For 18 years, I had worked at jobs that were not fulfilling to me, that I sometimes refer to as soul-sucking jobs. I needed to figure out what my purpose was. And so I did all the right things. I went to see career counselors. I took all sorts of aptitude tests and assessments. I read all the self-help books like What Color is Your Parachute and Do What You Love and the Money Will Follow. We know these books, right? Some of us have read them before. I did all those things, and yet nothing. Nothing came to me. Nothing spoke to me. I was completely stuck And I felt that if I didn't figure this out soon, I was going to do something drastic. I didn't know what it was, but it would not have been good. Maybe just run away from my life altogether. Well, because I was so anxious about this situation, I wasn't sleeping well. And so I went to see a therapist, a polarity therapist, who helps regulate the energy flow in one's body. And all I was looking for when I went to see this person was just to get a good night's sleep. That's all I wanted, was a good night's sleep. But as I lay on the table, and as the therapist passed her hands over me and around me, suddenly I saw a sign flash before my closed eyes. It was a sign that was as clear and as bright as any neon sign you'd see on the Strip in Vegas. I swear to you it was. It was so clear and so powerful that in that moment I had to jump up off the table and write down the message that I saw, lest I forget it. The sign that I saw said, "I want to connect deeply and directly with people." I want to connect deeply and directly with people. My purpose, my calling, my deep need was revealed to me in just that way, in just that moment of grace. And it was that moment of grace, that sign, that led me to the ministry and to my being here with you today. Grace. I was stuck. It came. I was changed. Maybe the best way that we can describe what grace is through our shared stories of our experiences. But if you forced me to give you a definition of grace, I'd say that grace is the appearance of the holy or the divine, the sacred, however you might want to characterize it, in our midst. It's a glimpse of what it means to be truly alive and present to the moment, a peek at possibilities. When it shows up, grace, I think, is an authentic experience of oneness. It creates a deep appreciation for our connection with all that is and all that we might be. Grace is, I think, in a flash where our wholeness is revealed to us. May all of us be open to and accepting of moments of grace when they arrive in our lives. This day and every day, I wish you peace. Amen.